Hello, I'm Sandra Gilman, Chairman of the American Theatre Wing, with our board president, Doug Leeds. Welcome to today's program. In dozens of shows in careers that span years and even decades, these performers play some of the most interesting roles in theater, and they always seem to be working.
They are the men and the women who are essential to any production, the featured actor and actress.
Today we'll meet several of those talented performers who'll share their thoughts on the diverse roles they play.
And we'll be back later to tell you more about the work of the American Theatre Wing. But right now, please join us for another edition of Working in the Theatre.
You've seen these hard-working troopers in numerous productions both on and off Broadway, in addition to television and film. Our guests today are the featured actors and actresses who never seem to stop working. Hello, I'm Pia Lindstrom for the American Theatre Wing, and joining us to talk about their diverse roles on stage are Helen Carey, Elizabeth Franz, Jayne Houdyshell, and Zeljko Ivanek. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, did you all dream of being character actors, or did that just happen with time? Jayne?
No, you know, I think I knew from very early on. The first role I played at the age of 14 was a Jewish mother. So I think that was an indication of, you know, the path I was on.
So you didn't dream of being the ingenue?
Never.
Did you think, well, you were started very young, so you started as a young boy. Did you think that you would become
I don't think I had any sense of the categories even. You know, whatever I was interested in, it was not about the kinds of role. It was about being part of something and what it felt like to share in doing theater. I don't think I had a very strong sense that there were any kind of categories to fit into or not fit into.
Well, I was told in drama school that I probably wouldn't work until I was Millie Dunnick's age.
And that was?
And at that time,
70?
I was 19, 20, and I didn't know who she was. Oh. And of course, then I got to work with her and all, and I said, well, do you mind if I try? And they said, no, you can try, but you probably won't have any success until you are much older. But then, of course, regional theater came along, and you could play older. You couldn't do that in New York. But now I have the problem of, you know, I've been playing this age that I'm playing now for so long that they think either I'm dead or I'm 98 years old. And that's
So you were never an ingenue?
Never an ingenue, no. Thank heaven.
It's the title of your autobiography.
You were an ingenue?
I was, but excuse me, I didn't think I was going into theater. I studied ballet for years when I was, from the time I was very little right through university, actually. And it came a point where I think everybody who studies it seriously realizes what a life in dance means, and you either are accepting of that or not. And I thought, no, this isn't for me. And so I just stopped, and to fill the void, I walked into the theater department. And that's how it came to be.
Was there anything about the dance training that did carry over very specifically?
Oh, absolutely.
What part of
I
it?
think your awareness of the space that you take up and the type of space available to you as a given character is an awareness that you carry with you if you've done a lot of body work. So I think it does.
Yeah.
Some of you play very creepy people. You, for example, play some very creepy people.
Make a living playing creepy people.
And you look so normal. I mean, where does this menacing quality
I don't know what that's about. I mean, at some point, I think you get hired for what you've done in the past and what you've gotten known for in the past, and hopefully you look for the things that break that mold a little bit along the way. I know there are definitely times where I'm intrigued by things just because it's different and it's not creepy man in a suit. You know, luckily there's enough variety in creepy man in a suit to keep doing it.
Both in television and Pillow Man, of course, I'm thinking of on stage. Where
Pillow Man, which is a part I almost didn't audition for because I felt so wrong for the role, because I I'd seen the play in London about a year before, and it was one of the most incredible theater experiences I'd ever had as an audience member. And then when it came time to for the auditions here, and I got asked to come in for the role that I eventually did, I just thought, I love this play, but I couldn't begin to play this sort of menacing guy, who in the London production was a much kind of beefier, bigger guy, and that's to some extent what he brought to the production, was just the physical menace. And I just thought, nobody's going to believe that. I'm 5'7", and that's all. I actually am 5'6"3/4", but I just didn't think I could believe that I could have any kind of physical, threatening presence.
Perhaps we should describe a little. I'd hardly
There
know,
are
a
two
guard,
policemen,
a policeman,
and one of them
torturer.
kind of, yes, he's the torturer, and the other is the kind of the sort of the intellectual one of the two. So he's definitely
So
the
you're
one
a
who's
killer.
just ready to pounce at any moment. And I couldn't suspend my disbelief there. And it took me 3 days of going back and forth between I really love the play so much, and I really think I'm going to be faking it if I try to play this part, and that's not going to feel right. That I eventually decided not to make a decision and just go in and see what happens. And then whatever that menace was came out in a very different way from the way they man did it in London. But it was very intimidating to try to fill that in, and I didn't think I'd buy it, and that's usually my biggest criteria, is like, can I believe it? Sometimes it's flattering when people think, no, you can do this, and you're like, I'm not gonna believe it coming out of my mouth, and I don't.
I believed it, so I don't know. In fact, I thought you were an enormously dangerous person.
The odd thing was, because then I loved doing the production, and had an incredible time with the whole experience. And about 3 or 4 months ago, I saw a production of it in Washington, and it was my first experience of the play since we'd done it about 2 years before. And I watched the play, and all over again, we're like, I can never play that play. I don't know how to say those lines. I went right back to zero, suddenly convinced I would not know how to do that all over again. So.
I think it's particularly difficult when you're coming at roles like that, where they're so detestable and so on. Your first job is to justify thinking through that filter, and nobody playing that kind of role wakes up saying, I'm going to be evil today. You justify what you're doing, and it is for the greater good, your particular greater good, that you do them. And to find those reasons make you go to dark places.
Yeah. And I mean, in that play very specifically was that. I mean, he had very specific reasons why he did what he did, and how he thought he was protecting the world and protecting children.
That's
right.
And then it gets twisted into this kind of anger, but you can trace it back.
And Jayne, you were a really scary mom. About the scariest. You had a malady. You were, I don't know, what was the matter with you? In well.
Oh, that's so interesting that you would call her scary, because I think of her as a totally benign, loving, adorable person.
No.
There you go.
So misunderstood.
So misunderstood. Well, that's an interpretation.
Grossly misunderstood by
Well,
her daughter, who was the center of the play.
I thought you'd wandered in off the street somewhere, because it was one of the times you didn't seem to be acting at all.
Thank you. I had spent the lion's share of my life working in regional theater, and literally, virtually no one in New York knew me or knew my work. And we workshopped it a fair amount at the Public Theater, and people really did think that Lisa's mother had just volunteered to come in and be herself on stage while Lisa kind of worked this play out. And that illusion was something that we worked very hard to nurture. So thank you for saying that it seemed very natural, because that was the goal, of course. And just anecdotally, I mean, to set that up when we were workshopping it, instead of having me come out with the rest of the actors, I said, as the audience comes in, why don't I just be asleep in the chair? And so by the time the play starts, I'll just be this body that they've kind of come to take for granted, this presence, and hopefully then I won't seem so actorish. And so I did that, you know, repeatedly in readings and workshops, and when we finally came into production, they said, why don't we just leave that, and you go out, Jayne, before half hour, and when they open the house, the audience will come in and you'll just be there asleep in the chair. And which was a fascinating exercise, to be there for half an hour and not fall asleep while pretending to be asleep in a very comfortable lazy boy. But one way that I would kind of keep myself alert was by listening to the audience. And one night there were two ladies in the front row, and they were discussing me. And one of them was saying, well, I don't think that's real, I think it's a dummy. And her friend would say, no, I think it's a real person. She said, no, it's not moving. She said, well, she's acting, she's pretending to be asleep. No, it's a dummy, look at the legs. At which point I thought, okay, I'm gonna play with them. And I twitched, and they both screamed. It was fun.
I bet.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about beginnings, Elizabeth. Where did you first start to act?
At the American Academy, there are two people, Pat and Fred Carmichael, who ran a summer theater in Dorset, Vermont. And they saw me at the end do Our Town, in fact, playing one of the mothers. And they invited me to be part of their season, which was 16 weeks, weekly stock, you know. And you started in May and you ended up in October. And you do a play a week, you know, learning all those lines. And I played, and that's where I began.
And that's where you think you learned most?
I learned extraordinarily well. She was a director, Pat, and he was a playwright and a director and an actor. And they, I mean, I remember doing, what was it, a Shaw piece, and she was so upset with me. She said, you're acting, I won't say it, she said, it's just, if you ever do that on my stage again, you are out.
What did you do?
I guess I was trying to play an ingenue. And I was trying to, you know, with the hair, and just trying to play an ingenue.
Oh.
And I was not rooted in any truth at all. It was Major Barbara. And so I had no truth in it, and she was right. And I think about her every night because of the feet being, you know, how important it is that you start from your feet up acting. You know, that you can't act from here
No,
up,
I don't
you
know what you
straight.
mean. What do you mean you start from your feet up?
Well, you have to grip the earth with your feet. It's not light air on the stage, you know.
Do you all do that, gripping your toes there?
Well, you don't. It's not really. It
No,
just
but you
means that you are rooted.
Ground.
But it's
Grounded,
a very
grounded.
physical
Grounded.
sensation. I was talking with a friend of mine who's talking about doing Hamlet soon, and I did it at Guthrie years ago, and I was talking to him about the first few previews where I'd never had this experience before of the first entrance I had was to kind of break away from everybody upstage and tear down to the front of the stage, which in a rehearsal room felt like I was leaving everybody to be solitary. And suddenly at the first preview, I was walking right into the laps of 1,200 people. And was incredibly disturbing to suddenly feel very self-conscious and very observed. And it went on for like several performances. I was incredibly self-conscious of everything I was about to say, everything I was about to do. And the only way I finally broke it was on the third or fourth night, was the sense I can't say the next thing until I feel completely rooted in this thing right now. And it's that physical a sense of needing to feel absolutely grounded where you are before you can move on. And kind of threw the play off for the night, but it broke the pattern. But it's so concrete. I'm curious almost about the dance thing you're talking about, because
Dancing, yes.
The awareness. You're of two minds. You're in your own character's space, but you're also aware of the storytelling to a group of people, and they are taking in not only what you're saying, but you know, when you watch debates, political debates, you're taking in a lot more information than what people are saying. And you learn possibly more about them by the way they're standing, by the way they're turning to someone else in their space or out of their space. All of that is as much a part of the dialogue as any speech that you hear in the evening. So the space that you take up on stage and why you get to that space. Guthrie used to say, and it helps in what you just said, it's always more interesting to say about a character, where did he just come from? Or where is he about to go? He just happens to land in this space at this time to say this particular thing, because he has nothing else he could possibly do than to be here at this moment. He's just come from something and he's about to go to something else. But this is the space that's giving the information at this moment. And you embody it with a voice and you embody it with your presence too.
So this is finding the character here. Let's talk a little bit about how you go about finding the character.
Well, to link this up to this subject of being grounded on stage, or where your character's physical being is centered, might be a better way of putting it. I was playing V. Talbot in a production of Orpheus Descending, who is a person who is not grounded. In fact, she's really kind of out there, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. She's very, she's a little crazy. And
otherworldly.
Let's put it simply. But anyway, I was kind of having a hard time finding that element of her, and I went to a costume fitting, and the designer said, and I was in a dress, and she handed me a pair of shoes, and she said, "I love the way these shoes look." She says, "I'm afraid they won't fit." And I put them on, and they were 2 sizes too big for me. But something happened to me physically in those loose shoes of not knowing where exactly I was standing, and when I was walking, I had to hold on tight to keep them on my feet, and that took me to a different place physically and emotionally and psychologically. And I said, "I love these shoes, let's use them." And I found who that person was literally from the feet up, to take it back to where you were talking about, through this happy accident of a pair of shoes that didn't fit. And it really became kind of the core physical aid in finding that character. A lot of stuff came out of just a simple pair of shoes. It was interesting.
Any other costumes that affected you when you put them on?
Yeah.
Nun's habit did with Sister Mary.
Oh,
That
Sister
would,
Mary.
wouldn't it?
Yes, it really was.
Well, what happened? You put the
Did
nuns.
you start early in rehearsal with it, or
No,
It happened
no, it happened
in the theater?
in the theater, on the dress rehearsal with it. It was the whole manner and my posture with my tilting of the head. It just happened, and the smile happened, and and it just leaned right into it.
When I did London Assurance, this is a woman who's far more comfortable with horses than with humans. And so I love the delicious contradiction of being in a pink silk gown, but you probably think she's got the riding boots and has just come from the barn underneath the silk barn. So it informed how she walked, which was totally contradictory to the social setting that she happened to be in at the time. So shoes, walks, that sort of thing are all part of that physicality of any given character.
And you, Zeljko?
I think uniforms do that. Is the only time I specifically remember there's something just about putting on a uniform that changes your physical bearing. You suddenly have a responsibility to that crisp look, and it's on K Mutiny we used them pretty early on. Because you just something
You were
switches
rehearsing
from your
in them.
rehearsal sweater, and you put a uniform on, and you can't slouch around anymore. You can't.
You were Lieutenant
just a
Commander
different-
Queeg,
Yeah,
so you were another scary type.
scary,
little scary.
self-justifying,
Self-justifying.
deeply self-justifying type.
When you talk
Deeply
to actors, we all have our justifications
Justification
for everything we do.
You can, even though you can be incredibly judgmental. I mean, that's a character in many ways I judge very harshly in terms of the play, but in terms of playing it and looking for somebody's vulnerability and their way of trying to hold on to their place in the world, that's very easy to relate to what it is that someone is protecting and what it is someone is holding in order to present to the world who they want to present to the world, and how much work it takes to do that, how much effort it takes to keep that in place is separate from a judgment you may have about that person in the play as a whole or in the world.
Do you try to convince yourself that you are that person?
I don't know if it's about convincing yourself, or hopefully that's where you get to. There was with Quig, there was a physical thing of he has these steel balls that he uses to control the shaking of his hands, and there are two separate scenes. In the first scene, in the first act, he's in complete control until just a kind of flash at the end of it that he's been slightly thrown off, so that you don't telegraph what's going to happen in the second scene. But by the second scene, that physical thing kind of creeps in, and he needs more and more to sort of control himself, and the balls actually comes out to sort of try to keep a lid on. And I just felt I had, in the end, very little control over the shaking, that on some level that was happening in and of itself. In the first act, maybe I suggested it once very deliberately in a very specific place, just for a second, where I just reached into my pocket for a moment. But in the second act, at some point when people would comment on the shaking, I'd go like, you have no idea how little control I have over that, and when it's happening, and it's just, I hope, the emotional
It happens.
world.
You've talked about that once. I read that you said you want the woman to come to you as an actress. You're not searching her out, but can you describe that process?
It's a matter of asking her to use me, to portray her, you know, and whatever happens, and I am not guiding that. I'm not controlling it. And that this kind of thing is happening now with the play I'm involved in. People say, oh, the poor actress has palsy.
It's the piano.
Piano teacher. And it's not that. It's the fear that she lives with. Her fear. And then when she's presented with the fear, when the young man comes in, I have no control over the shaking. And the control of the hand just starts going.
So you are inhabited by...
You hope to be.
Yes.
Yet that doesn't
It
always
feels a lot
happen,
better when
but
you think
it
it's
does-
doing you and you're
it
not
does.
doing
You're
it.
not doing it.
It's sort of akin to
comfortable.
music, too. If you learn a piece of music, you learn it by the numbers, and the music is over here and you're here. And with actors, it's the script that you all assemble and start working on. And I love this process because it's usually somewhere in the second week of rehearsal that you stop becoming individuals working on your part of it. You start feeling the vibrations of the interaction, and you start becoming a breathing entity. You start becoming the script and the characters. And I love that moment when it's almost, you can almost feel it drop in, where you leave your own particular world and you start moving and pushing against or pulling toward whatever the author's trying to do with the story. And
this sounds a little different than the Stanislavski method, where you should be feeling your own personal emotions and crying for your own childhood and bringing your personal life in. You're describing another sort of a process.
You're part of an orchestra, really. Of course you have all that inner life, but you're contributing to a larger story, which in turn feeds back on your own character.
And it's your character's inner life, not this actor's inner life. That's the whole difference.
Now, when you did Linda Lohman, Death of a Salesman, that was almost a Greek type performance, was it not?
It's funny that you say that, because I felt that. I felt she was Greek-like. She would kill her sons if they hurt her husband.
So
her love was so Greek-like that she would sacrifice her sons for the love of her husband.
So
when Bob Falls asked me, and we had a meeting about it, I had done it 6 years before in Cleveland with Hal Holbrook. And I felt that, and I said, I've always felt that Linda Lohman was Greek-like. And he responded to that. I said, her love is so great for this man that she would sacrifice her sons if they harmed him. Yeah, so.
You've done a lot of Greek tragedies, haven't you? Do you play big?
I'm jealous. I've never done Greek. I'm too jealous of it.
I just did the Persians last year at the Shakespeare Theatre in Washington, and that's an interesting thing because it's a formulaic in its presentation, and the obstacle there is to keep a human voice and sensibility behind the formal language. If it's just presentational, the audience can disengage, but if you see on the surface a mask, but underneath you feel the hits that any particular character is taking, it's a wonderful challenge to do.
Mm-hmm. I had an interesting experience when I had the dream job of my life. I was invited to the National Theatre to do Buried Child, which is Sam Shepard. Now that's very Greek-like too. But they would all talk about Shakespeare, and I would say, I hate Shakespeare. I just hate Shakespeare. I love the Greeks. And I still get emails asking me, were you telling the truth? Do you really hate Shakespeare?
So we're not allowed to say that, are we?
No, and one of my lines in The Piano Teacher is, my husband was the one who made me love Shakespeare. Now, I read Shakespeare when I was younger, but oh, how dreadfully boring I found him. And then the director would say, you say that so honestly. I hate Shakespeare.
I'm not acting.
Can you describe the process of saying lines that are not about what they're about?
Oh, that's so interesting. Actually, in the case of The Receptionist, I think there are other plays where that dynamic happens and you would approach it differently. But in the case of the role that I'm playing in The Receptionist, she happens to be a person who is a champion of denial of the reality of her circumstance and things that are going on in her life. And she chooses, she's very good at compartmentalizing, in choosing what parts of reality she will take in and will be engaged in and will be enormously invested in, and what parts of her reality she chooses to completely shut out. And as a person, she does that. And as an actor, I too must do that in order to play her. So actually, I don't have a conscious thing going on about sublimating something or repressing something. I don't repress anything until the circumstances of the play take me to a point where I can no longer deny. And then everything comes up to the surface in very alarming ways and in the most terrifying ways, really. But I think the reason it's terrifying is because up until that point, there's no clue in the audience's mind as to what's really going on.
It's the same theme there.
Same woman.
Same woman.
Same kind of woman who denies her whole life. And she has made, and she goes to the end of the play saying, I'm looking at nothing, I'm thinking of nothing, and that's how I like it. And this is the story I tell. I was a piano teacher. I taught piano to children. And so even though she lives through horror, through the circumstances of the play, she starts mundane, she lives through the horror, and then she denies it at her last moments, too.
When I saw you as Mrs. Higgins in Pygmalion, I laughed so much. I've seen that story, My Fair Lady, many times. I didn't know that part was as funny. You managed to have found humor, so much humor in it.
Well, I think a lot of people who come to Pygmalion think they know the play because My Fair Lady is so embedded in our culture, and that is not the play that Shaw wrote. And but even at the time that it was being done in his day, the audiences begged for a happy ending. And so there were liberties taken and suggestions and changes in a subsequent script that suggested perhaps she went with Freddie, or perhaps they ended up together. And he was adamantly against a romantic conclusion to the play. And I think one of the challenges when I first came at it was to think, what kind of parent would Henry Higgins have? And I wanted her to be someone from whom you could see, oh yes, that's her son, and this is how he sort of got away with as much as he did. Also in the educational system then, children were sent off to boarding school, and the parents and the children did not have the relationship that we accept as the norm today. They were possibly not that close, so it was a more formal thing. And I think he was very much in our production a product of the British public school education, you know, where he's the individualist. But I love Mrs. Higgins. Will it rain, do you think? And I think that's the springboard from which Henry goes on and does his own thing. But she's riding that fine line between the proper British lady and the exasperation of someone who just upsets her life every time he comes to visit and steals cookies.
You've all had long careers and worked in many fields. Do you still have to audition when you?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh sure.
You know, they still make you
I
do.
just came from one.
Did you really? No.
I sort of reach a point with television things where a lot of guest shots in television do come up as an offer, but everything else is auditioning and is just as excruciating as it ever was. And I was trying to figure out my percentage is really bad. When I think about the percentage of jobs I get off audition, it's got to be 5% or something out of 100 auditions.
It's unlike
if
anything
I get 5
that
jobs.
we do in our work. It's not like, it's a process that is totally fake, because it takes us a while to act with each other, to learn our characters with each other.
The process of sitting in an office and pretending that you are on a wall somewhere screaming into the wind or whatever it is you're meant to be doing while you're sitting in an office chair with somebody 3 feet away with a camera in your face. My suspension of disbelief
I know,
is
it's just,
bad.
no.
Yeah, it's not a party trick, and it feels like in that circumstance that's what's expected of you. It's like, go from 0 to 60 like that. It's very difficult.
Maybe more so film and television, because I think I actually haven't auditioned for a play in a long time, so maybe that's still a different
Because
experience
you do
because there's so
Oz
much
and
more material.
Homicide and yours.
It's been
working.
more, the theater things have just been fewer and kind of further between lately, and K Mutiny was an offer of a Pillow Man movie. It was the last one that I seriously read for, and somehow that's a little different because you got 2 or 3, 4 or 5 pages of rich, dense material in some sense of having a story, as opposed to here's a page and a half, and you have every 4th line.
Right.
It's very difficult to kind of believe in that and invest in that and really feel you're bringing something to it that's essentially functional.
You particularly had a career outside New York, traveling all around the country. You're like the itinerant
Totally.
performer.
I was completely itinerant for about 25 years.
How could you have a life, as they say? Or that was
well,
your life.
that was my life.
That was your life.
That was my life, and it was a very rich life. And one of the reasons that I kind of found that as my niche, I think, was because I've always valued being able to play the broadest range of things possible, not only in terms of roles, but also in terms of kinds of plays. And the regional theater provided this really rich playing field for me to do everything from the ancient classics to modern classics to, farce to deep tragedy and everything in between, and musicals and straight plays, etc. And so, it provided a really rich life and career for me for many, many years. And then I burned out on it. And I became very road weary and very tired of being transient and living out of a suitcase. And I made the decision at that point to say no to out-of-town work and start working in New York. And that was a difficult transition for a couple of years because no one in New York knew me. Casting directors didn't know me. Directors who worked mostly in the city didn't, producers certainly didn't. And so I went through a couple of very lean years and it was actually, for about 15 years I hadn't auditioned. People were just calling me with jobs. So I had to kind of learn how to audition on my feet and, all of that. But then slowly but surely I started getting workshops and readings in the city and working on new plays, which was terribly interesting and exciting for me because I'd never known what it was to originate a role. I'd been doing the tried and true all those years. So it feels like a whole new career for me over the last 5 or 6 years.
In the early years, I spent my first years at the Guthrie, and again, it was repertory. And all the directors came there, and all the plays changed, and you did 3 and sometimes 4 in rotation in those days. So your interest was constantly challenged, and you got to work on different things in the course of a week's time.
I think of you as being always working.
Regional theater kept me alive until I was at Yale at their repertory, and that's where I met Chris Durang. And they asked me to do one of his plays, and I didn't understand his play. And I said, oh, I'm not going to be any good in it. And I said no. And then he asked me to come and read for Sister Mary. And I said, now this character I understand, which terrified him. Which was like, because they had me back 3 times to make sure I wasn't as crazy as you understood it. But that's what brought me into New York. But I still go to the regions to do like Long Day's Journey with Sam Waterston and things like that, the big ones that you won't be done here.
You had your own personal odyssey from Yugoslavia, or Slovenia, I guess it is exactly. What was Yugoslavia?
At first it was just some sense of acting out and performing in front of people, whatever that meant. And the first theater that I was really exposed to is when we, for the second time, moved to California, was to San Francisco, and it was the second year that ACT had just moved there from Pittsburgh, or wherever they were before. And my parents got a subscription from me, apparently. I don't know how I expressed an interest, but they said it was, years later, they told me it was because of me. And every 2-3 months you saw another play, and it was mostly classics and a lot of Miller and Chekhov and Kaufman and all. So it was a very kind of wide range, and I thought that's what I would do for the rest of my life. That became in my head, that's what acting is. You do this range of plays and all these classic plays, and that's how you make a life in the theater, and I've barely done any of that since then. But it turned into a completely other experience or other road than I thought I was heading out on, and I now can't conceive of anything else, because the number of productions would have either done the first production of, or the first American production of British plays. It's just been incredibly satisfying to be, you talk about creating a character the first time out, and have a playwright there, what that means, that there's a writer in the room, and something you do actually may affect the life of this play. I went up to Exeter a couple weeks ago, a friend of mine teaches up there, and they'd been reading Master Harold and the Boys, and she asked me to come up because I did the first production of that. And I was telling the story of something that happened in a rehearsal that is the only change in the play that happened during the rehearsal process, because of a kind of incredibly challenging moment from the director, who was the playwright, and it was a very autobiographical play. He kind of asked me to kind of go much further with a particular moment, and the whole circumstances of it were so difficult that it was completely baffling to me. And all I could figure out was that somehow it all had to do with in the play and in the situation we were in with alcohol, and I wound up taking out my frustration on this bottle of whiskey that the character's father had asked him to bring home, and breaking it, which I had no intention of doing, except the glass shattered all over the room, and eventually stage direction changed so that this bottle was now broken in the play, and it's pretty much my highest achievement in the theater is that one sentence stage direction. That's something that happened in a rehearsal room is now permanently in that play.
It's in
and
theater
every
lore.
production.
It's the most lasting. I wouldn't say highest necessarily, but it's a lasting achievement.
Really up there for me because the sense of being a collaborator in a process and of being part of something communal out of which I mean, you are there to serve a play and you're there to serve a writer. I have no illusions about that, but the extent to which something you bring to the table can then affect the work as a whole is just incredibly satisfying.
Do the
Just happen in
playwrights
completely
give
different
notes
field.
the way directors do?
Some.
Depends
do.
on the playwright, I think.
Some will do it through the director, some will.
So you get
talk to
notes. How do
directly.
you like getting notes from the director? Is it helpful or
From the playwright?
from the playwright
Depends
or the
on the
director?
playwright.
Yeah. Well, did you ever get a note you liked?
Well, I mean, for instance, on Lisa Krohn, who was the playwright and also playing herself in the central role in the play, is a very collaborative writer and worker and actor. And that was an extraordinary experience, actually, the triangulation that happened between director, playwright, and actor. And having been in development with that play for over 4 years, the bonds that developed were incredible in terms of trust. And Lisa, as a playwright, was so welcoming to input from myself as an actor. I got very spoiled that way, and but it paid off. I mean, that's just how she is effective as a writer, is by working collaboratively with people. That's her way. But I've had other experiences where it's not necessarily as helpful to hear from the playwright as it is to hear it through the director, maybe.
Or from the other actors? I know they don't give notes, but how important is the co-actor with you?
You don't want to hear notes from the other actor.
You don't want to hear notes from the other
But
actor.
can they help
You
you
do
to be more
occasionally.
creative, for example?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, very much
Well,
so.
you two work together, so
Well, I was
you
just
help
thinking
each
about when you
other?
were describing that on with Neil Simon. Part of you walk into a room and Neil Simon is sitting at the table. I mean, there's a certain thing you just have to get over. That he's not doing anything; he's just sitting there. But you can't get past who
We
he
had
is.
an actress that was replaced in Brighton Beach because she could not get over Neil's presence. And I suggested, and I was nobody at the time, that maybe if, as Kate, I might like to wipe the table of the dishes to know what my frustration inside is. And if I did, I said, Neil, I'm afraid you probably would fire me, you know, if I did something outrageous like that. And I said, so that is the kind of it's kind of the lid that your presence is putting on us. They had taken me to lunch. I thought I was going to be fired, and they were talking about.
2 people were fired.
2 people were fired.
Just
They
waiting,
were
waiting to find
fired.
out who's next.
Yes, I know. But they were trying to say what could be helpful. I mean, because I was with this other person with her lines every night, and I knew she knew her lines. I was at her house.
So it was just
but
his
just his
presence.
presence. So he went away.
Yeah.
He went away for
you had
5
that
hours.
experience?
Yeah, and it was with Neil, actually,
Oh,
but not a new play. We were reprising, we called it Hotel Suites, and it was Plaza Suite, California Suite, and London Suite that we did as an evening thing. And he came in and updated a great deal of the language. And what I so appreciated, the same thing though, the first time you spend the first day going, oh my God, Simon across the table.
It's like God.
But there is a line that Diana says in the original script where she's drunk and she's come back and she hasn't won the Oscar, and she's drunk. And in the original script, it's Sydney, I look exactly like a steel-belted radial tire. And he said, that's a bit dated. So he said, let me think about it. And he came back the next day. He said, try this. And the line was, Sydney, I look exactly like I'm going to look. I said, that's brilliant. That night he came back, he said, I want to add one more thing. I said, why? He said, but the audience needs one more beat to let the joke drop in.
Genius.
And this is an example of watching his craft.
Unbelievable.
And I said, are you sure? It's so clean, it's so short, it's so wonderful. He said, no, try it. The audience really needs it. So it was exactly the same line with an addition. And it ended up being, Sydney, I look exactly like I'm going to look one day.
Oh, that's cute.
Then there, you see.
And
that's genius.
he's just got an ear.
Yeah.
He doesn't watch, he listens.
But have you ever worked with a director that you had to work with, but his notes were lousy, and you said, I don't want to do these things?
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure. You want to name
That's the
names?
edited portion of this evening.
We want to know who are they. No, without saying their names. I mean, so describe a situation where you. Well, how do you handle that? You get some note, and you say, I can't. I don't want to do this, and I can't do it. What have you done?
I've always felt, just philosophically, that my job is, if I receive a note that either flies in the face of what I'm thinking or whatever, or I don't exactly understand, or that my job as an actor is to figure out a way to incorporate and find some truth in what the note is for me that I can incorporate, and also at the same time not necessarily compromise, what I know to be true about the moment or the character. Now, sometimes that's absolutely not possible, but often I find that if I just wrench myself open enough to let in what it is that I feel resistant to, I'll find something in it, and something of value, if I can find a way to incorporate it into what I'm already believing and thinking about.
And oftentimes, too, the director, if he's a really good director, will say, that was a really lousy note.
Oh, really?
Let's pull back from that. Let's just go with your instinct or something.
Yes.
And then often they would do, but you have to try it. You try it and you try it and you try it, and then if they're really good, they will say, that's bad. It's getting into the way of the flow.
And sometimes it's also really about establishing a trust as well, that if you are asked to do something, even if you think it's very wrong, that just in the working process, you have to give a benefit of a doubt in order to receive a benefit of a doubt. Yeah. And that's what goes with playwrights as well, that you will get listened to by a writer if you establish some level of trust in terms of the commitment you're giving and the thoughtfulness you're giving, not just to your role, but to what's going on as a whole.
Yes.
And sometimes you kind of need to give something over so that you have some credibility when you say, but I still think that's wrong.
That's right.
Or I still want to try something else.
Yeah. Willingness really helps.
What do you all do when you go to the theater in order to erase the world and to step into a new character? Do you have something that you do, or a ritual?
My ritual really is just showing up plenty early.
Okay, you arrive early.
Yeah, well, between an hour and a half to 2 hours before.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it has to do with being inside the building and saying hello to everybody, crew and company alike, and sitting in front of the mirror for a significant amount of time so that I know that I'm really here and I've left the day behind and all sorts of anything that might be distracting. It just takes me time to get there, and so I make sure that I allow myself that.
Zeljko?
I don't. I mean, I show up early enough to be able to have some kind of just social time with everybody, and just the showing up, and somehow that part of just leaving the rest of the world and being in this world. And the only thing this partly became superstition. I don't know what it is anymore, but at some point, I think it was the first time maybe I had some big chunk of a monologue, is that I will go on stage and run that very, very, very quickly on stage, and then just take a moment. I love empty theaters. There's something about an empty. That's kind of my church, and the sensation of standing center stage to an empty house and taking that in, and I just take a moment to take that in. That's it.
I'm a 2-hour person too, and I go on the stage, but I like saying hello to everybody and all of that. I'm backstage though about half hour just sitting in a chair, and trying to get my nerves. I'm somebody who never loses her nerves until the first line, and then the character takes over. But sitting back there as me, and not knowing, as you say, what's going to happen when you go out. I mean, any amount of things could happen. And you have to just try to trust that, no, you know this securely and you'll be fine.
Meditate?
I do.
And I love to put on appropriate music, and it's like you have this enormous house that's you, and you're able to close all the other doors and just go to that one room that is appropriate, that mood, that feeling, that energy, that allows you to be in that particular space that night. But like you, all I hope for every night is to be empty enough of myself and the daily whatever, to let go of all that and let the play fill you up. Because, you know, some nights you think, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You're too much in the way of the play to get it. But if you're sufficiently empty, and by that I mean gutsy enough to just show up and let the play fill you up and not know what it's going to do. Those are the best nights usually.
Are you frightened?
Depends on the role. I don't think frightened, no. I'm apprehensive and I'm energetic and I want it to start. But this, you know, if you're carrying a lot of responsibility, you're apprehensive and you're keyed. But long ago, I remember being very, very nervous as a student, and my mother came to see the performance, and she was there in the afternoon, and she tried tea, and she tried distraction, and I was still going on. She said, you know, Helen, nobody's coming to watch you be nervous. You know, that's really good advice. They're coming to see a story, to be told a story, and it's not about the actor, it's about the character. So I think of that often.
Any stage fright over here?
In previews.
In
Definitely.
previews.
In
You
previews. The
get-
first sensation of, you know, walking in front of an audience, and are you grounded enough, and do you know what you're doing well enough, and what's going to come at you. But I usually, for the most part, fades. And there's still a certain level of apprehension just because you know things can go wrong, and that's a scary moment. I remember actually going up in Brighton Beach 4 months into the run, completely blank in the middle of a story. And being spooked for about 2 weeks. And that's the part in previews that you're just, am I grounded enough? Do I know this well enough that something can come flying at me out of the blue and I'll still be able to stay on track? You don't know what can throw you off.
What is that when you suddenly forget something? Is it that you're not concentrating hard enough, or what is it? What if this happens?
I don't know what it is.
What
but
is it?
The trickiest thing is that you don't forget the words, you forget what you're talking about.
I
you
know,
forget,
it's like the
you
neurons
go
stop
blank
firing.
Beyond blank.
Yeah.
I didn't know the subject matter. I wasn't forgetting what the sentence was. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I was this close to having to say, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I have to start the scene again when like a word came out. But that was about a good minute and a half of me fluffing and
I wonder what that is in the brain that does that. Have you had that happen?
I have
the
had
lack
it
of
happen. It's really terrifying. I don't know what it is. It really feels almost neurological. It's like the brain just says, okay, I just have to shut down here because we've done this so many times.
Right.
But it's terrifying when it happens. On the other hand, though, I do find that when I'm beginning the run of a play, I'm very nervous. But once I weather some sort of disaster, something going wrong, or being on stage when something happens for someone else, and you weather that, it's like then I realize, oh, okay, I remember that I can trust myself to,
I can handle this.
you know, take care of things when things go wrong, and that's part of the experience of being in live theater, is that spontaneous thing that anything can happen, and that's kind of a wonderful thing.
There are two kinds of going up. One is you can't remember a word or a particular phrase, but you're still cognizant of the argument, and you can quickly substitute something and you keep going. And as you say, the other kind is you don't know whether it's Tuesday or February. You're just gone. And it's freezing. You just can't see, you can't hear, and you just don't know where you are, and you just have to stop.
And hopefully you have wonderful people on stage with you to help you out.
And you cross your eyes or
an actor
something
was
and let them
staring at you
know.
like, I've stopped listening to you 2 months into this run. I don't know how to help you, but I feel sympathetic.
Yes.
I remember the
My
other actor
heart
like
goes
hugging
out.
me. We were hugging at one point. You were like,
Yes.
but like, hug me, but give me a line.
What is the line?
Give me something.
Can you whisper?
I appreciate your sympathy, but really a little help.
How many syllables?
Oh my
That's
gosh.
with piano teacher, because it's only me for the first 18 pages and talking to the audience. And I must say that during the preview it was just thinking of words, not making sense, just trying to jump off the cliff and try to do it. But it's terrifying. And then all of a sudden you start owning it and you start being able to play with it, and it gets comfortable. But it's terrifying. I mean, when there are no other actors to help you.
That's
at all.
incredibly lonely. I've
is.
only done
It's
it once
all
where the
uphill, yeah.
monologue and that sense of you're going out there and whatever's going to come fresh is going to come from you. I don't know how you do it for
lonely.
very long.
Yeah.
It's a weird sense. So David Hare was telling me one time about Judi Dench he did a one-man show, and Judi Dench came to see him. They were talking about that and doing a one-man show, and he said, "Have you ever done it?" And she said, "Oh, no. When I walk down onto that stage, I have to believe I'm meeting someone." There's such a comfort that there's somebody
Maybe she knows the lines.
And even if it's not in you right now, it'll come to you if you just feed off what the other person is doing. But the sense that it's just you is very scary.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to all of you. I've enjoyed it. I hope none of you go
Thank
up on
you.
your lines or having this frozen moment. Anyway, I have enjoyed so much talking with you. These programs are brought to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York in partnership with our friends at CUNY TV. On behalf of the American Theater Wing, I'm Pia Lindstrom, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Working in the Theater.
The American Theater Wing has played a vital role in New York's theatrical life for more than 60 years. We stand for excellence, and we support education in the theater.
Best known for creating the Tony Award, our work reaches beyond Broadway and New York.
These seminar programs, which are supported by the Annenberg Foundation and the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, are an unequaled forum for discussions with today's most creative artists.
Downstage Center's in-depth interviews are heard on XM satellite radio. Our grant and scholarship programs support New York theater companies and theater students. And since we began, we have given away more than $2.5 million.
Our theater intern group helps young people who are just starting in their careers build a professional network.
And Springboard NYC is a 2-week boot camp for aspiring actors from colleges across the country.
All of the American Theater Wing's educational and media programs are available for free, on demand, from our website, americantheaterwing.org.